space. We also are live streaming, so if you're joining us from somewhere not here, welcome as well. For folks who don't know, Haymarket House is a movement and cultural space here in Chicago. It's also the home of Haymarket Books. Haymarket Books' offices are on the second floor, but we welcome folks to use our community event space. If you are interested in finding out more about the space, please come see me at any point. And we are excited to host this event with our friends from the Chicago Reader, who continue to lead the way with community journalism and independent reporting. So thank you to folks from the Chicago Reader who are here. We also want to acknowledge that Haymarket House events take place on the occupied lands of the Council of the Three Fires, the Ojibwa, Ottawa, and Potawatomi, and other tribes, and the indigenous keepers of this land who through acts of genocide, deceit, and dispossession were forcibly removed to found the city of Chicago and the state of Illinois. We recognize the nations that live in and around this area and the at least 75,000 indigenous people who continue to live and struggle for liberation in Illinois today. And we stand in solidarity with them in their ongoing struggles. So to get to our event tonight, I want to introduce our speakers for the program, and then I'm going to hand it over, I think, to Katie. First and foremost, Katie Prout is a staff writer for the Chicago Reader, where she covers addiction, homelessness, Chicago culture, and the vibrant people who inhabit this great city, some of whom you'll get to hear from today. Lloyd DeGrane is a Chicago-based freelance photographer whose work has appeared in the New York Times, the Chicago Tribune, the Chicago Reader, the Paris Match, and other national and international publications. He specializes in location photography and portraiture. And Ryan Spangler currently works as a street outreach worker and permanent supportive housing case manager at Heartland Alliance Health, and is a housing outreach partner with the Night Ministry Street Medicine team. And I will let you introduce our other guests as the program gets going. But welcome everybody. Let's give a round of applause for our speakers. Perfect. Thank you.
Can you guys hear me? Awesome. Like Dana said, I'm Katie, this is Ryan, this is Lloyd, and this is Bob. Bob, I'm going to say a couple things to introduce you, and if there's anything that you want to add to it, let me know. Bob is my resident expert in all things Narcan and their use. Bob, I met 2 years ago outside the men's hotel, had a great bandana and a lot of energy, and was telling me all kinds of stories about growing up in Chicago, including right here. Bob, at one point, while incarcerated, trained for and ran his own half marathon in the prison yard, which I think is a testament to the kind of trouble you get up to, the good trouble, and your dedication and spirit to like really doing what you can when you put your mind to it. So Bob has over the years been a tremendous resource for me in terms of learning about harm reduction, dope in Chicago, ways to use safely and stay safe. He helps me fact check sometimes when I'm trying to understand like why sometimes people use a Narcan needle. Call it Bob. Because it works. So in terms of using that to inject as opposed to like a regular syringe. So I really appreciate the time that you've taken out of your night to be here with us. Thank you. Yeah. Thanks so much. We're going to keep this pretty casual. But yeah, I think we're going to get started first with Lloyd. I'll pass the mic back to you. It's going to show some photos to kind of set the scene of what we're talking about and the kind of journalism that we do and the spaces that both of our guests work in.
So yeah, I've been documenting the underground activities in the downtown area for about the past 7 years. I started out with a couple of fellowships from Northwestern School, Journalism School, the Medill School. And I just wanted to kind of paint a picture of sorts about the area that we are kind of focused on. So this is a quote from one of the residents of Lower Wacker. His name is Blanket. Next slide. And that's Blanket. So he's a guy that just kind of travels around Lower Wacker, doesn't have any permanent place to stay. Many people in Lower Wacker do that. They just kind of move around. Next slide. I'm just going to kind of go through quickly. This is an area in Lower Wacker. The physical place of Lower Wacker is a lot of air pollution, a lot of dirt floating around. And, you know, many of you have probably driven through it, but walking through it is kind of a different story. Next slide. This is a guy named Ryan. He was living with pigeons along Illinois. There's a lot of streets that branch out from Lower Wacker. He's one of the people that died last year. There were many of them. We focused on 6, right? Yeah. But Ryan died, drug-related death. Next slide. This is a woman that I found that I was friends with for a while, and as I got to know her, she had endured physical abuse from other residents there, and finally she just kind of slipped away. She disappeared, but she kept this journal on a wall outside of her tent in Lower Wacker, and you could see just through the months and years how her abuse led her to withdraw and eventually just disappear. That's what happens with some of the residents of Lower Wacker. They're there one day and gone the next, and nobody knows what happened to them. Next slide. Lower Wacker at times is also a very violent place. I've been documenting weapons that people carry with them just for their own protection. This is in the old medieval kind of era. People carried a mace, and this was a homemade mace. When he swung this around, people kind of cleared away, and they didn't bother him very much. Next slide. This is one of the residents of Lower Wacker. I was just trying to show you in a few slides about the violence that occurs, not only to men, but to women. Next slide. This is a friend of mine, Chris. He was beaten as he charged his phone when he came up from Lower Wacker to find just an electrical outlet, for an hour to charge his phone, but 8 or 9 people jumped out of their car and just decided to beat up a homeless person. And then he was beaten up and then made his way back underground again. There's a whole story with these, but we'll just kind of keep it simple. Next slide, please. And then there's always this surprise. Katie, I think you were with me, right?
Yeah.
So we were walking along Lower Wacker, and all of a sudden, this person comes out and starts playing a violin in the midst of this chaos and, this kind of horrible geographic area. You start hearing violin music, and it's just, totally something different and unexpected. Next slide. People live in very, terrible conditions down there. Ryan, when we get into this a little bit more, you could talk about the difference between housing and the way people live here. But this is a camp that was used by quite a few people, and it brought rats. People just defecated against the walls here, urinated against the walls. The city brought down a couple of public toilets during the height of the pandemic. It helped a little bit, but there's a need for many more. But because of this, the rat population in Lower Wacker is seen just many times over. Bob could testify to that.
Can we actually pause for just a second
Sure.
and see if Bob or Ryan has anything they want to add to any of the photos that we've seen, or just kind of what you're talking about right now?
That's normal.
Yeah.
That's normal.
We're going to get into your camp, too, a little bit.
Okay, well, it's a little better than that.
Yeah, right. Yes,
Yeah,
right.
you guys kept it good.
Yeah.
Uh-huh. Okay, next slide. And so you see the slide just before this, but in a lot of the tents that were set up in Lower Wacker before the city brought in porta potties and hand washing stations, people just used a bucket and then empty the bucket in the sewer. They still do that because there's only 2 public toilets in Lower Wacker and many people down there. Nick, go ahead.
Just jump in real quick, sorry
Yeah,
to interrupt your flow, Lloyd, but that's something, as a journalist, I think about, as a story that I also would love to see, like when we're trying to like generate stories from community members, whether community members on Lower Wacker or people that are housed, a lot of people will talk about, CTA stations or, like an alley smelling like piss, or there being, vomit somewhere or something like that. And to that, it seems like this Venn diagram, and I think for me as a journalist, that's where I try to go into the middle there, this overlapping concern, where both of, neither, whether you're housed or unhoused, you want a bathroom and you want it to be free and accessible. And that's not something we have a lot of in Chicago. Myself as a runner, I run, on the lakefront during the winter, and the lakefront bathrooms are closed from Labor Day to Memorial Day. And so I just wanted to say, the type of journalism that I think that we can do as a reader, and something that I'm learning and trying to do, is finding that like common spot where we can all talk about like what are people actually upset about. And it's like, well, nobody wants this thing. That's part of public health and safety too for everybody. So
Right. And when the city finally did bring public toilets down to Lower Wacker, one of the residents in Bob's camp said that it felt like her birthday and Christmas all in one day, and that was just because of the installation of a public toilet. Next slide, please. And that's Stacy. That's the woman that said that, and that's the camp. Bob wasn't in that camp at that time, but he was maybe a few months after that. But Stacy lived in this camp under Lower Wacker for about 8 years. Next slide. And I had actually, for the past 7 years, I've been documenting this one camp, and just from one perspective. And I go there, often, but every month or two, I take a picture just to show the changes that have occurred in this particular camp. Next slide. And that's, so I think many of the residents in Lower Wacker are addicted to either fentanyl or crack, or are in some way mentally unstable. Yeah, and some alcohol too. So this is people doing crack. And it's sold. It leads to more violence. Drug dealers are coming downtown like I've never seen them before. There used to be no drug dealers downtown. Now there are many. And they're fighting for turf. People are getting shot at, beaten up. So things are getting crazy. And I'm about to lead into one of the residents, and then next slide. So, and one of the, and of course, like I said, fentanyl is now mixed with xylazine, which is a horse tranquilizer. This is causing a lot of people to get abscesses that they never had before in places that they didn't even know they could get an abscess in. Next slide. And this is Ron. This is one of the people that we focused on that Katie wrote about. This is Ron with something he used to protect himself. So you want to talk a little bit about Ron?
yeah, I'm going to take a second too. If anybody has any questions at any point about what you've seen or how this has changed, or questions for anybody up here, feel free to jump in.
There's that RV that you can get needles from, and that does it stop down there?
That's a
Oh,
really good
yeah.
question. Yeah, you want to talk about that though?
There's several of them.
Oh, there is.
There's several of them. Yeah, they got food, they got clothes, they got needles and alcohol and wipes. And they got everything on there for that.
I mean, I stumbled across the R&B sitting at Foster and Plastic.
There's several of them.
And,
Yeah. Some come once a
going
month,
on
some
around
come once
here,
a week.
I guess so.
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah,
because
they're
there was
there.
a little line.
You know, but a lot of guys don't use them. You know,
Yeah.
they get past the point of cleanliness. They get so messed up. It was bad. Ron was one of them. Ron was past the point of cleanliness. So I thank God he died. He just got so sick. You know. You know, you're injecting in your neck, and you ain't wiping your neck. You're not wiping your hands. You're not wiping a needle. You just putting a used needle in your with your dirty hands in your neck. They'll all. I mean, come on, dude. You ain't got long to go.
One of the things that I feel like, Bob, you have, that I've seen you offer other people, whether at the camp or at the men's hotel where I first met you, is kind of advice on how to use safely.
Yeah, if you're gonna use it like a doctor would use it or a nurse. I mean, it don't take but 30 seconds. You know, if they don't do it, they get so wound up in them. You know.
Yeah.
I think I have one more slide. Could
You
you
want to do it?
advance, please? Yeah, and that's Ron. This was the picture that was used in the Chicago Reader. That was Ron during a very bad day. He had finally, I think, realized that the end was coming. He was very sick, was in the hospital, checked out against medical advice, came back to Lower Wacker, started doing the same thing over and over.
Yeah.
And
Exactly the same.
he didn't last very long. And Katie wrote about it.
Yeah. Actually, Lloyd, I have a question for you before I put you on the spot. But can you talk a little bit about, you like me, this photo is one example we talk to people or document people sometimes on some of the worst days of their lives. Can you talk about how you wrestle with that as a photojournalist in terms of ethics and relationships and boundaries, all of that?
I was just talking to Dan about death yesterday, and it seems like in this world, death is accepted. Like it could happen tomorrow. It could happen in the next hour. And because I've been doing this for almost 7 years now, I've come to accept death like everybody else in Lower Wacker on the streets. That I don't know if I built up a callousness to it, but I mean I still feel hurt and pain of people, but I now accept death, and I'm not really bothered by it that much. I mean, because it's almost like a domino effect. You do everything in this dangerous world, and it keeps on rolling right downhill, and eventually it's either going to be one thing you're going to get out of it, which not too many people do, or you're going to be dead. So I've come to accept that. What about you, Bob?
Yeah.
How do you view death in that world?
It's
You came close.
regular.
Not,
I
yeah,
mean, it's
right.
a normal, regular thing. I mean, it's what happens.
It's like when Ron died.
Yeah.
I don't think people just said, "Well,
Okay.
that's what happens," you know?
Yeah.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah, but like I say, it kind of, they do it to themselves. The help is there. I mean, if you want to keep getting high, but at least be clean about it.
Right.
And it's there to help you. And they're not using it. You seen it.
Right.
I want to talk a little bit about harm reduction. Maybe that's something that you can talk a bit, Ryan, as well. Thinking about, something that Bob, that you're talking about is people, whether or not they're using, is how to use safely, and what needs to be done on an individual choice level, but also at a systemic level. It's something that really animates a lot of the work that I do, the journalism that I write, hope to write, is in addition to journalism. I'm talking to people, like I mentioned, on some of their really rough days in their lives, and I don't want to make it worse, but I need to acknowledge that my presence isn't just like a odorless, bodiless thing. I can shape a story. People might tell me something that might bring up feelings for them, and in the kind of by trying to be realistic about that, I see journalism as a kind of harm reduction tool. to help not just people that are in the specific harm that we're talking about, whether it's like addiction or homelessness, but also getting other people who might be housed or not addicted themselves, like to think about their own role in relationship to each other and to the city and all of our neighbors. So I wanted to stop quickly and just talk about what harm reduction is. I don't know if that's something, it was a new term to me a couple of years ago when I came back to Chicago. My working definition of it is like, basically it's reducing harm. No one can stop someone else from using drugs, for example, but you can make the circumstances in which they use it less deadly. So Bob talking about the Night Ministry, the Chicago Recovery Alliance, these are bands that do a lot of outreach, that provide needles and alcohol, wipes, connections to housing services. Ryan, would you be able to talk a little bit about harm reduction, maybe what it means to you, but also then how that folds into your work?
Sure. Thank you. So I think, harm reduction, as Katie hinted at, doesn't just apply to substances, so that's a major piece of it. It's sort of a philosophy, in my view, that you can approach any number of societal issues or problems or people with. So it kind of lives at the intersection of empathy and self-determination. And you really need to strive to see the world through another person's eyes, and not come in with your own moral system that you bring to the relationship. So lots of non-judgment, and moving forward from there based upon the goals and the values of the person that you're working with. And this philosophy can be applied to any number of places. And the famous one is, wearing your seatbelt is harm reduction, or and anything that seeks to reduce harm of a high risk behavior, which is driving a car like that. And in terms of housing, it's really about sort of adapting to the need of the person and the individual. Maybe if they're using drugs inside the apartment and it's causing an issue, then you develop strategies to use in other places so that their housing is not in jeopardy. Or they're smoking, opening a window, working with the landlord, explaining, how substance use works and how housing is a human right, and how everyone is in need of housing, and how housing is a step towards recovery and it's healthcare. And so doing some education on that. And so those, that's the main principle.
I think the last time I saw you, you and I were passing each other, I was with Bob, who, if you want to talk a little bit about your housing situation now, Bob. I first met Bob, like I said, when I was working on a story about the last men's only hotel in Chicago. It's an SRO, a single room occupancy hotel. Honestly, Ryan, you might do a better job defining it than I would cleanly.
Sure, yeah.
I've got some slides of that coming up pretty soon.
We can switch to that in a second, but then I would love to talk about, like, Bob, kind of the housing, that housing aspect for you.
It worked. I got a place, but I turned 2 down because they weren't where I wanted them. I wanted to go on, I told them the north side anywhere because this is where I was raised. I was raised here, this is where I wanted to be because I knew it. I didn't want to go to the south and the southeast side, and that's what they had to offer them. So I just waited my turn, and they finally came up with something on the north end. So I'm happy. I'm sure everybody wonders, how do people end up downtown? Well, a lot of the guys They were selling drugs in their neighborhood. They ended up doing them. So the boss man gonna beat them up or hit them in the head with a pipe or shoot them or whatever. So what do? They break and they come and hide downtown. And, you know, I mean, be surprised how many that happen. And a lot of neighborhoods are not gonna have homeless people. The neighborhood thugs are gonna come run you out. It's simple as that. You know, people might not believe it, but dress down and go lay down on a park bench, you'll find out. You know, so I mean, that's, and you see, you know, so many, you know, but it's a big city, and it's surrounding suburbs, so they all end up downtown, you know, and some are only there for a month, a couple of weeks, but some end up staying there and getting addicted. You know, addicted to that crazy lifestyle and don't want to get out. You know, and that's the truth.
End up staying there for 10 years.
Yeah, I mean, yeah.
Mm-hmm.
But that's how they end up there. Go ahead.
Oh, thanks. Yeah. So I was going to say, I think Bob illuminates an important point that oftentimes people are unhoused because they don't want the housing that we have to offer, right? It's not that they don't want housing, it's the specific type of housing that doesn't meet their needs, doesn't, you know, what they want. And so, you know, I think this speaks to an important lesson that I learned is utilizing all the systems that we have in place, like the statewide referral network, the Chicago Low-Income Housing Trust Fund, the CHA, the coordinated entry, and just, you know, trying to have numerous tools in the tool belt in order to tailor the services that we have towards what the people want, and that will lead to a lot of success. And I think that's what happened in Bob's case. Bob's at the Major Jenkins at 5012 North Winthrop, and it's a studio apartment. It's a CHA building.
Is it an SRO itself, or is it?
It's not technically, the way that I define an SRO, there's some ambiguity in how SRO is defined, but SRO typically means you share a bathroom or, and you don't have a kitchen necessarily. So these are more small studio apartments because you have your own private bathroom, you have your own kitchen. And it's a CHA building. I believe Bob got in, I think Bob got in through the statewide referral network, but, so the Major Jenkins itself, you know, takes referrals from all these different avenues, so CHA, CES, and the SIA.
Ryan, on the open mic, what are some stories that what are some questions you wish journalists would ask you about your work and about why it's important?
Yeah, I mean, I think the way that I like to view journalism, I think they can be agents of change, right? I think being intentional about that and making the invisible injustices that exist visible to the public, to our culture. You know, I think back to the civil rights movement and how important media was to expose it, like what was going on in Jim Crow South, and I think it was integral to the success of the movement as a whole. So I think journalists being intentional about what they cover and you know, making sure that you know, they're thinking about social justice and social work. And you know, that's what I like to talk about, like what are the gaps, how does society need to change, you know, the big issues. I feel homelessness is ultimately a housing issue, and that we need to talk about those bigger systems. Because you know, it's easy in our work to just focus on the individuals and look at the individuals and see, wow, look at these folks that are using substances, look at these people with mental illness. Obviously, that's the cause, right? And to not really take a larger view and realize that most folks that are mentally ill have housing. Most folks that are using substances have housing. And the regional variations that exist in terms of number of homeless people don't have to do with any of those things. It has to do with housing affordability and vacancy rates. Not whether, not how many people are using drugs, not how many people are mentally ill, but ultimately the fact that we don't have enough housing. In the game of musical chairs, the most vulnerable folks are going to be without a chair, but the issue is that we don't have enough chairs.
Does anyone have any questions right now that they wanted to ask about any of this so far?
I was curious, what does fentanyl come in? Is it a powder or is it a tablet they're pressing?
From my understanding, all different. You can put it in and on anything. That's my understanding.
There's a couple of pictures coming up. There's small bags, $10 bags that most people buy downtown. So it kind of comes in a powder, and I have a slide too about what's in the bags too. So I take samples to get them tested at the Chicago Recovery Alliance. So,
Which, if you don't know what that is, it's a harm reduction organization in out on the west side, like East Garfield Park kind of area. It's an incredible place. It opened in the 90s. And really, Dan Biggs, who was one of the founders, was responsible for getting Narcan, which is the opioid overdose reversal drug, out of hospitals and into the hands of people that need them, which is crucial. Yeah, I might take a second maybe and read some from one of the stories.
yeah. Would you like to read? There's, could you, next slide please? There's,
There's hope.
so this person, she went by the name of a couple of different names, Sheila, Hope. She didn't die of an overdose, but she lived in that camp with everybody else that was addicted. But her story was a lot different, and I think Katie, you could address that.
Yeah.
Next slide, please. And this is Hope, who protected herself and masked under Lower Wacker. She was kind of a phantom figure walking around.
I promise I'm not just texting during a talk. I'm pulling up, I printed out a couple parts of the stories, but I think that maybe I'll read some from Hope's section. So this is from a story that I published with the Chicago Reader as a memorial piece about 6 people that I knew that died who lived on Lower Wacker or in the Loop in 2022. And when I wrote it, I was really pissed because A, being angry can be a little bit of an easier feeling than being sad, and B, these deaths as I view them, and I think that the piece makes an argument for, is that these are all preventable deaths. Overdose deaths are preventable. They do not have to happen. Deaths from someone who is dying because they don't have access to health care in a hospital setting because they're stigmatized because they are homeless and using drugs, and they don't go to the hospital, or they do and they have an actual brain bleed, which happened to someone that was misdiagnosed. These are preventable deaths. They do not have to happen. We tend to think about deaths for folks that are overdose deaths or people who are experiencing homelessness who die as a tragedy or something that's to be expected if we think about it at all. Otherwise, there tends to be a little bit of condensation. Well, that's what happens when you use drugs. Or and it completely takes away everyone has a responsibility in this. And what I mean is, it's not that everyone has to go out and build a home for someone else to live in, but like Ryan was talking about, housing as a really important part of healthcare, looking at seeing what your older people are involved with, looking and seeing what kind of housing policies are in your neighborhood, educating, picking your, one thing that kind of is your lane that you can learn more about and challenge yourself on, I think is really important. For me, in terms of harm reduction and addiction, the idea of keeping people that it wasn't abstinence only was a huge new thing for me to learn about. That a goal wasn't necessarily to get someone to stop using or to stop drinking, but to get them to stay alive. So we'll start here. Let me pull up Hope's story. So this was Sheila Hope Hex, June 29th, 1971, December 2nd, 2002. Lloyd called her the Wanderer, a young veteran I first met when he was reading Churn and Now for Kids on a crate outside of Ron's tent, knew her as Sheila. Have you seen Carlos? Asked a nurse practitioner from the back of the Night Ministry's street medicine van, his good-natured face slightly crinkled with concern. We have like 6 months of its mail. Hope, said Hope, when I asked her once again to confirm her name. Hope kept herself to herself. Everyone knew one thing about her, but no one knew the whole. Alternately, she introduced herself to me as a bisexual man who goes by he or she, a gay man who uses she/her pronouns, a trans woman, and a self-described former female impersonator who used to take hormones until they made her sick. Each time Hope told me who she was, that's who I knew her to be. Like Laura Wacker, Hope was adaptable, mercurial, and sometimes lonely in the dark. She liked purple eyeshadow and nail polish. She followed rumors around the love life of Mayor Lori Lightfoot with great interest. Hope detested the illicit drag racers who crashed into the concrete buttresses by her head on Saturday nights just as much as she detested Jeff Bezos. And as many questions as I had for her, Hope had for me. How much do you spend on cat food? Do your cat eat a lot? What color is he? Is he very friendly? You got cable? You never watch My Cat from Hell? Y'all don't watch too much TV. How do you like your husband? Ooh, not your husband yet? Well, when will he be? Y'all thinking about getting a big house pretty soon? You have a good job? Can you afford your rent? Is there a lot of crime over there? Mixed neighborhood? A lot of black folks over there? Puerto Ricans? A lot of good restaurants? Walmarts? Walgreens? You know how to get out of a lock hold? It's good to know self-defense. Are you safe down here? Are you safe down here? I'd ask her. Hope says, yeah, she's safe. She shows me her pepper spray and a long, flat board tucked into her cart. No one has come for her because she hasn't given them a chance. I always be looking behind me. She liked a spot for everything and lived tidily. Before Hope headed out for the day, she covered her bed, a mattress on some blankets on concrete softened over the years by exhaust, dust, pigeon, feces, and the detritus that drifts down when the hotels above the camp open their beds for cleaning on Sundays, with a tarp, carefully tucking its corners under her mattress so no rodent could worry its way into her sheets. Once, she was bitten by a rat and had to get 5 shots in the soft part of her arm. She lived at the same camp Ron did. It was Hope who lived here first, 10 years ago, when she lived alone on this bank of concrete and tugged for use as a loading dock and shaped like a broken kite. Hope didn't like drugs, but she did like light beer, white wine, and cute cocktails if she could get them. She loved romance novels. Like most of the others, she spent years on and off various housing lists. She was born in Jamaica and moved to Chicago from New York City. Sometimes, if she was feeling social, Hope would push her cart and visit with a couple trans women she knew who stayed further down Lower Wacker. Or drink beers with Stephen, a white man who sleeps on a mattress under Lower Wacker, only a few yards away from the Riverwalk and its bustling monetary flow. I wish I knew what they talked about. Hope, who spoke fast and low and ended all of her sentences with, you know? And Stephen, who's almost entirely deaf, although sometimes he tells me he hears my voice very clearly calling his name. I tried tracking down Hope's next of kin for this story, but was unsuccessful. She told me she had a wife who died of breast cancer and an ex-husband. With her wife, she parented 5 kids, or 4, depending on the day I asked. And Hope's understanding of her life, time bent and looped. At different times in her life, she worked as a makeup artist for a phone company and a Walmart. At one point, her son Brian lived with her on Lower Wacker. He was my baby son, she told me. Alternately, she said he died from an air bubble and a needle, he froze to death, or he died because someone gave him some bad drugs. However it happened. And Hope, the wanderer, was out wandering. It was around New Year's Eve. For some time, the rest of the camp rustling and hustling around him, Brian lay unmoving beneath his covers. The others thought he just nodded off and needed some time to rest. When Hope came back, she slapped his covers, called his name. I don't blame the others at the camp anymore, she told me. Hope watched while someone from the city arrived and put him in a body bag. He was my best friend, Hope said. We actually got along very good. We stuck together.
It was his belongings she pushed in her cart as she walked. After years of homelessness, Hope had her apartment for almost exactly a year. That's where she died, the morning I sat down to start writing these obituaries. The cause of death was hypertensive heart disease and diabetes, two diseases that, with access to real care in a functioning country, do not have to be terminal. I never did go over to see her, but I have no doubt she kept that place cute. Even though she had her apartment, I still saw Hope downtown from time to time, pushing her cart. I gotta get my mind right, she'd tell us. I'm walking to clear my mind. The last time Lloyd and I saw her was in November, walking down Lower Wacker. She told us that she liked her place, and we told her we'd try to visit soon. That's, go ahead.
I don't think you were there when she was there. No.
Were you gonna say
I
that?
don't remember.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know if your guys' time crossed paths.
I don't think so.
Yeah.
Might have, yeah, she pushing the wagon, I wouldn't, I didn't know her. No.
Next slide, please. So now I'm going to show you a series of pictures. We're going up above on the streets. The people in Lower Wacker call the streets above, they call it up top. And up top, people sleep in doorways, some have tents, if there's a little opening space. This is Luke. He used to panhandle at night. And a lot of people, they dress for the job. And people call this their job, panhandling. So Luke was out there for quite a while, and he's actually clean. And now he went back to his parents' home, then he got a little apartment, and he called me a couple of weeks ago, and he's doing pretty well. Next slide. And then we have Valerie. She was one of the people that Katie wrote about. I photographed. She died last year. She panhandled on the street. She was one of the toughest women I've ever met. She could really take care of herself. She was in jail a few times, got into fights there.
It was Rocky.
Yeah, right. So,
I said
Next slide,
her
please.
nickname was Rocky.
exactly. Yeah, her name was Rocky. This is her, like about 5 or 6 years ago, living on the riverfront, the Chicago River. Next slide. And then this is the last picture I took of Valerie. It was in an alley, and it was an alley that I told myself later after I took the picture that I wanted to make sure I didn't visit that alley at night because there was a lot of danger there. People dealing drugs, and you never know what was going to happen. But I wrote a little piece for Katie's story. I don't have it with me, but I could just kind of sum it up right now. Valerie told me about a guy that overdosed on the west side who lived downtown, and his name was Cliff. He was with a friend. He overdosed in kind of like a little empty field, and his body was just sitting there. It was like a couple of Julys ago when the temperature was in the 90s. His body was there for a week. So Valerie finally led me to the area where she thought the body might have been. We looked all over. We finally smelled the body. And I looked down and I got a little bit closer, and his legs were covered with maggots. I called the fire department. They came. Valerie was in tears, even though there's this really tough woman that had seen death many times. This one really got to her, and this was Cliff. But anyway, and then Valerie herself, a couple months later, she died. So I was talking about being callous to death in this world, and it's like all of these people. I probably know 40 or 50 people that have died. So, next slide. And they died because of this, many of them. You could turn around. And so you were asking about the packets, These are $10 bags. He kept those bags. They're used, but he kept them so that he could use a razor and kind of scrape out the bag at kind of like at the end when he ran out of dough. those aren't totally full bags, but they're used. But there's still a lot of stuff in it, and you could scrape it out and get by. Next slide.
I'm going to jump in really quick with that one and also say that one of the things that I learned in my reporting and in my research that has been interesting for me to learn is that there are some folks, researchers, harm reduction workers, who say that the opioid epidemic should not be called the opioid epidemic, but it should be called a mass poisoning epidemic because, you know, with the criminalization of drugs, people aren't able to know what is in what they're using, and so sometimes it's opioids, sometimes it's fentanyl, sometimes it's xylazine, it's Benadryl, coke is showing up again, and much like when Prohibition was on, people were making their own booze, getting it from, you know, gangsters that we romanticized because they were Italian and white-coated as opposed to black. They would still get, you know, people would get sick and die, go blind. Couldn't actually determine what the source of their alcohol is. But now, yes, we still have alcoholism for sure. Alcohol is legal, but people know what they're drinking. Drinking too much of it will kill you, but you can be sure that the quantity, like what is in it, is what is said. So yeah, I just wanted to chime in with that one real quick. Also, I wanted to note that we've got about like 10 minutes or so left.
Okay,
Make
we'll
sure that we
kinda
find
go
the folks
quick.
here too.
So, and I got to know the drug dealers downtown. This is the start of a day for a drug dealer. He's got a bunch of jabs. Those are like about 12 packets, 12 bags, and you could buy that for $100. And he's also got a couple of $1,000. This person just a couple weeks ago was beaten and robbed. There's now like a string of robberies of drug dealers downtown by groups of people that rob drug dealers. Next slide, please.
Can be lucrative.
Yeah. So this is one of the bags, pretty typical of what we find in them, tested at the Chicago Recovery Alliance. So xylazine has been showing up for about the last year. It's a large animal tranquilizer, and it's being found in just about every bag that we've tested, along with fentanyl, baking soda, lactose, and benzos in a lot. So it's all this concoction kind of mixed up together, and like Katie was saying, you know, people don't even know what they're using anymore. So, next slide. And this is one of the night ministry people. There's a lot of people that are helping. You were talking about that, yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot.
And this is Ralph, who died. That's one of the night ministry doctors in the middle. That's Ralph on the right. He died last year too. Next slide, please. This is Ralph.
Yeah.
Next slide. And Katie wrote about Ralph. You want to just sum it up a little bit about what Ralph.
Ralph, I first met him, he was as a model. He took a picture from outside of the men's hotel. And when that story came out, the way I really met him is he came up to me with a copy of the store and he was like, "It's me, I'm Ralph, Raphael from page 14. He was just a real sweet guy. His best friend Dan is going to be joining us at a panel tomorrow at Harold Washington Library. But yeah, Ralph, you know, had some hardships, immigrated, well, I wouldn't say immigrated, he was coming from Puerto Rico, but ended up being in Indiana growing up, Spanish speaking, and it was pretty tough in the town that he was at. Came to Chicago at one point looking for work, didn't work out, and that's where he found, he had used crack beforehand, but this is where he found dope. And he died of a polydrug overdose. So just like opioids, but also there was other stuff in there too. Yeah, it was, for the story that I did, there's some folks that I knew really well and other people I only met once or twice, and so it was important to be able to talk to family if I could, but often like friends. Dan was one of them, to get an accurate kind of more complicated portrayal of who people were when they were living.
Next slide, please. And this is the men's hotel. I took it on a winter day. Next slide. This is the outside. This is at Clark around Van Buren. This is the inside of the men's hotel. When a person checks in, this is what they see. A little bit different from the residences that you place people.
Yeah.
Because the men's hotel is
This is
full of
it.
cockroaches, bed bugs, mice.
And also, though, I've met
Yeah, but it's a respite for somebody that has nowhere to go.
people stay there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah,
Next-
for sure.
next
Want to
slide,
talk a little
please.
bit about that? Oh, can we pause 1 second
Oh,
just
yeah.
because I actually have met like those housing outreach workers who do place people in the men's hotel, and the men's hotel,
I've done it.
yeah, there's
Yeah.
many issues with like, everybody deserves to live in a place that's clean, and we can talk about the landlord of the hotel another time. But yeah, why is a hotel a space like that? Like, what need does it serve?
It serves a real need, unfortunately. The person someone that has a sex offense, no landlord will touch that person. So their only option, they don't ask any questions. You got the money, you get a bed. No application, no background check, nothing like that. So it's
Ryan, while you're talking about that, I think we could just see the pictures and you
Sure,
could
yeah.
talk. Yeah. You could just kind of flip through. But go ahead, Ryan.
or people that are waiting for have just lost, they've been doubled up with somebody, they lost their housing, and they're waiting to get into their apartment. That they could stay there for a couple months. It's a gap transitional place. That keeps people alive. It keeps people out of the cold. They're not freezing outside in a tent. They're actually inside somewhere. Granted, they probably have bed bugs and have to deal with all kinds of insanity. But when your choices are bad or less than bad, right? Sometimes you have to choose the lesser evil.
And this, the slide before that, the chicken wire, a lot of the rooms are covered with chicken wire. There's no ceiling, so you can look right down into, like that one right there. Yeah. Forward, please.
If there's anything you want to say about it, that we're welcome to.
The same thing that happens on the street happens in the men's hotel. There's violence. This person was sliced up right outside of the men's hotel. Next slide. There's also people that do drugs in the hotel. And there's people that die there. And they sometimes stay there for a day or two. It starts smelling, and then people complain. And then the medical examiner's office comes, takes the body away, and people just kind of disappear.
Yeah,
Not everybody, but many people do. Yeah.
that happens. Regular basis.
And then I just wanted to kind of end it up with,
Yeah.
we're going back to Lower Wacker now. So this is another woman that died over on the left. Brittany is her name. Next slide. She armed herself with a lock on a sock. That's what it's called. You could swing these around real fast. It's also called a smiley because when you hit somebody with it, it leaves a smile impression on skin. But these do a lot of damage to people, and they're relatively inexpensive to make. Next slide. And that's, I interviewed Brittany. She didn't really want to be to show her face, but she told me a lot about what happened to her, and then she died last year as well, from complications from opioids, many years. Next slide. And kind of ended up, there is hope. We can't let that die. This is one of my favorite pictures because Drew, who is walking up the stairs, actually did get housing. His life is a little bit better now, but that was like one of the last days that he was under Lower Wacker. So.
Yeah, I have one question for you, Bob, and then any questions that anybody else has would be great. Bob, hi. Why did you decide to talk to me as a journalist? Like, what made you want to talk to some, like...
I had no reason not to. There's no reason not to.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, I wasn't in a hurry, you know.
Yeah. I think Chris said there's no sense of urgency in the
No,
underlying. Right,
you
yes.
know, you got
Right.
all the time in the world.
Yeah.
You know, when you're living out there, that's, you know, day and night, you know, it's the same. You know, except during the day there's people there and they leave and then it's all pretty much homeless. And now they really got a mess down there because they had a shipment of Venezuelan and South Americans. And from what I heard, it was 800 young men and 200 women, and they put them all right there on Plymouth in this building. They got a dorm, and you know, out of 800 young men, if you just take 10%, would be 80. You're gonna have trouble out of 80.
Yeah, well,
I mean,
you
it's
know,
just the way it is down there.
One of the things that Greg, who used to be on Lower Wacker, who's now staying at the same shelter that migrants are currently being housed in, said that these are people that don't know that they're homeless yet. They don't know what it is to be homeless in America, but I can teach them. Yeah.
There was one thing I wanted to say too, the under Lower Wacker, because it's artificial, there's sodium vapor light, so it's yellow cast in everything. I sometimes go down and people say, what time is it? And I'll say 1 o'clock, and they say, is that morning or night? And it's just, you know, people lose a sense of time, which is very disorienting.
Yeah.
Is there anything you wanted to say else? I can help you.
No, I mean, I can just end on a positive note. So recently housed someone, just we were talking about the conditions under Lower Wacker, that he just got housing last week, and he came to my office today, and he just seemed like a completely different person, mentally, seemed just more calm, happy, and he commented about the stress of the noise. You know, living under the perpetual traffic and noise and honking and constant. I mean, it's just a maddening experience. I mean, I guess he get numbed out to it after a certain point, but so the stress of that, I think is important.
I think we talked about that
And also-
cacophony of these sounds, you know, that are just
Constant.
are constant. Yeah, right. People live 8 or 10 feet away from roaring traffic under Lower Wacker, trucks and buses and cars. It's insane.
We could talk about this forever. Don't tempt us with a good time. Does anyone have any questions after all of that for anyone up here? Yeah.
If you speak to why people don't choose shelters but choose campus or
Ooh.
shelters.
you want to talk about that, Bob? He said, why do people, instead of staying at like city shelters, why do people choose to stay in encampments instead?
One thing is the freedom.
Yeah.
Yeah,
There are rules. Right.
The shelters, the big ones, are being run like prisons. It really is. I mean, you can go check in yourself, check it out. It's horrible. It's ridiculous. Your stuff is stolen the first night you're there. Don't ask me how they do it, but the workers get into suitcases and boxes and cabinets and whatever you have of value, they got. You know, and I mean, they have a lot of older guys there that just, you know, they don't know what else to do. You know, they need some caseworkers in there because there's a lot of older guys there. And, you know, they're just grateful to be indoors, you know. But for as far as, you know, like you say, go to the shelter. No, you got to be back by a certain time. If you want to eat, you got to be back by a certain time. If you want to take a shower, you got to be back at a certain time. There's no kind of movement. You know, you're pretty much stuck. You have to stay there if you want to eat, you know. Well, it's bad. And all of them are packed. they stay full to the rim, and it's like when they get the sub-zero weather, they take everyone in and just, put in an auditorium and stairways, wherever they can put them to get out the cold, get freezing cold, and then it's really nuts. It's a bad life. I went through there. I never stayed. No, I'm gone. I'd rather sleep on the stairway. Yeah, it was bad.
Yeah.
Well, just thinking about here in Uptown 46 like, our shelter's closed. Our former alderman let them go. And one. And two, like, when I was volunteering at a shelter, they allowed, it was a youth for youth. And it was allowed, and they were allowed to come. They couldn't do drugs on site, but they could come high. But you can't at a lot of these places, right? And then the other thing is just so many people. We had, CTA passes as in case we overfilled. That's where we sent them to the red room for the night.
I didn't know about that.
Yeah,
Yeah. People using the CTA shelter.
sure.
And now everything is compounded by the migrant.
Yeah, the migrant movement.
We're flooded with migrants in the city. So
Yeah.
Are you guys seeing any kind of when you have interactions with the cops, are you seeing any civil commitment cases? Or what can you just talk about what happens when the cops come and what the interaction's like?
Yeah. Can you talk a little bit about when on Thursdays when cops and the city cleaners come up to the camp?
No, well, they come through last week Thursday. There was nobody there. The tents were out. It was cleaned up, and they took everything that wasn't in the tents. If it wasn't in the tent, they took it and threw it away. And they red tagged the tents. That means you got a week to either start living there again, or if they come through Thursday, they're gonna throw the tent and what's in the tent away. So you have no place to put your stuff. I do, but the other people who was left behind, their stuff is gonna get thrown out if they ain't there. They know, so that's kind of left on them to make sure they're there Thursday morning, because the city will take it.
this is every Thursday under
Every
Wacker.
Thursday
Yeah.
they come around. And it's Department of Housing, or
DFSS? Yeah.
Yeah.
Department of Family Services.
Supportive
Yeah,
services.
but every Thursday, and
Police, sanitation trucks,
yeah,
DFSS. There's a whole group of people
yeah, a
that
group
come.
of people
you know,
go
yeah.
every Thursday, and they can be kind of unforgiving. I mean, they don't want us down there. That's the main thing. They want us out there.
We got the convention coming again. I was
The
just curious,
Yeah.
if they're gonna try to,
Yeah.
I know the last, I don't know if it was a convention, something was happening, but they cleaned the encampments out at that point. I know they changed it, they can't do that, sweep them out anymore, right?
I don't know. That'll be next year, and we're gonna find that out, right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
That's it. The other thing I wanted to say was, once upon a time there was mental health centers. You could sign yourself in as John Doe, kind of clean up and stuff for the weekend and go on your way. After they said Reagan, of course, you know what I mean, and all of those closed up. Well, of course, the prisons loaded up. But it's like that wasn't that complicated a structure, mental health centers. Why can't we recover some sort of structure? It isn't that. That expensive.
I think we should stay on our new mayor's ass.
professionally speaking, because one of the things that he has mentioned is supporting opening up the mental health centers that Rahm Emanuel shut down. Yeah, so that's something, you know, politicians make a lot of promises before they get elected. But I think that's something to follow for sure. Because I also like what you're saying is these are spots that are offered in a neighborhood where you can get the support that you're still sort of in control of in your own way too. I think that's really good. I know that it's about 7:40. Maybe if you have like one last question, then we can actually move this if you want. There's a reception, refreshments, food and drink outside, and you can keep talking and enjoy some lighting and some snacks. Yeah.
Well, I guess perhaps more a question for you, but kind of, yeah, I was thinking about the contents of the drugs I'm wondering, like, what was this bag sold as? Like, was it sold as meth? Was it sold? And also, like, we have, now in Wacker, like we have, even in the libraries, you can have lots of boxes, they have, you know, whole storeroom full of them. And we have fentanyl strips at the library too. But is that what we need right now in the street? Because it sounds like we're a step behind.
You're asking some really great questions, and I know with testing, my understanding is that we're often months behind, sort of like when the drug flow, like kind of like finding out what's on the streets, there's a delay because to get to the real nitty gritty of what is in a bag, you have to, the testing itself takes time. The Chicago Recovery Center does a lot of the testing. They might have to send something out. It takes a little bit to compare. Now, the fentanyl strips are great because, especially if you're buying something like Coke or MDMA, you know, what you think is going to be MDMA, testing a bag of something that is not an opioid is a good way to find out whether or not it might have a little bit of fentanyl in it. Now you know, you can decide, oh, I actually wasn't expecting that, I'm not going to use it, or I'm going to make sure I have Narcan. It gets a little dicier when we're coming to what I keep calling dope is an opioid, is heroin, although that's pretty vanishing on the streets of Chicago these days. Dope is kind of the umbrella term for what is sold as heroin or is sold as fentanyl. Much like ecstasy is the umbrella term for what used to be pure MDMA, but is no longer. It's often cut with meth or Adderall or powdered milk. And so fentanyl strips are useful to a degree, but they can't give you the percentage of a bag, like in your baggie, you won't know exactly how much fentanyl. Some people look for fentanyl because they prefer that high. It helps with keep them from withdrawals. It gives them what they need, but they don't know how much is actually in there. So getting, testing that would be able to get it down to that amount would be great.
But if you go to a dealer, you're just saying, give me 2 Ds.
Yeah.
And,
they don't.
That's two bags of dope. So, or you could, crack is big time too, right?
Yeah.
Downtown. So it's either you're buying either D or C. So if you go to a dealer, that's what you're getting, They're not going to say like, oh, this is fentanyl,
Yeah.
Right?
They ain't gonna itemize.
Yeah. Because you already know that it's fentanyl, Right.
One more thing, it seems like meth was the epidemic every place else for a minute. Did it miss Chicago or something?
Yeah, it did. Yes, it did.
Crystal meth was, in the Twin Cities, it's just a wasteland, there are encampments there. But I don't hear about it.
Right.
No.
Second.
It hasn't flooded the city. When it does, it'll be another disaster.
Fentanyl is too tough.
Well,
Yeah. The downtown dealers are selling D and C, dope and crack.
that's it,
Yeah.
I'm gonna call it there. Thank you so much for all of you for coming. And thank you for the evening, and Dana could direct us on where to go next.